When did we lose the republic? I think, regardless of where you exist on the political spectrum, whether or not you're left or whether or not you're right, we can acknowledge that something is off. Something's not quite right. Now, perhaps if you're on the left, you can always chalk that up to Donald Trump. Too much of our modern day condition for the conditioned mind is laid at the altar or the feet of Donald Trump. But I think that we can all acknowledge there's something wrong that exists in a much broader time frame than simply the last 8 years of the U.S. presidency. You could argue for the past several decades, the bandwidth of variance between a Democrat and a Republican has been incredibly narrow. The expectation of change from the United States government, very low. And the connection to the American people with Washington, D.C., so very, very tenuous. And it makes you wonder, what went wrong? What happened? When did we lose our republic? I think it's undeniable that the United States government has gone through various phases. Of course, in the origins of our country, we truly embraced the concept of federalism, a constitutional republic where states were empowered and the federal government was restrained. That changed over time. There was the creation of the United States Federal Reserve. The Civil War rearranged the relationship between the states and the federal government. We've gone through various iterations, various moments where we have transitioned into new eras. We are not constant. We have not been, as is often said from the left, we have not been simply a pure democracy. And for those that understand the true nature of the United States government, we haven't been a consistent constitutional republic. And it's worth asking if today we have arrived at the nadir, like the lowest point in the responsiveness of the United States government to the people, when did we lose our republic? Well, I would point to a couple of different moments in our history that show a turning point for the United States. In the late 1800s, extending into the early 1900s, there was an era on the Supreme Court of the United States that's defined as the Lochner era. The Lochner era was a series of decades of decisions from the United States Supreme Court that all seem to buy into a concept called substantive due process. This substantive due process was a new right, a new relationship, where the federal government became the protector of the individuals against the states. Specifically, Lochner versus New York was the Supreme Court of the United States making law to strike down a state law that regulated economics, that regulated minimum wage. The Supreme Court of the United States then protecting economic liberty. They might have had a judicial activism bent, but they were doing it in pursuit of a politically conservative or capitalist mindset, said states don't have the right to regulate minimum wage. This began an era of changing the relationship between the federal governments and the states. This is a big change for the United States. The Lochner era ended with another Supreme Court decision that I think shows a huge turning point, where you could argue this is when we lost our republic. The 1930s, the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as we've talked about in past episodes of the Will Cain Show, was at the very least a socialist and had a lot of sympathies for, I think, communist ideology. He envisioned a second Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights. He wanted to rewrite the United States Constitution. In it, largely what his presentation represented was the same kind of rights you've seen enshrined in the Constitution of South Africa. And before that, the USSR. This is where a citizen would have positive rights, a right to vacation, a right to leisure, a right to a home, a right to health care. Of course, these are not the kind of rights that grow on trees. And in order to create those positive rights, you'd have to intrude upon the philosophical foundation of the United States Constitution, which is the protection of negative rights, freedom from interference, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of property. FDR threatened to upend that nature of the relationship between the individual and the state. But during the FDR administration, there was a case before the United States Supreme Court called Wickard v. Filburn. Wickard v. Filburn is a seminal moment and the United States Republic. The Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution is one of the most tortured and utilized phrases in the Constitution to empower the federal government. But it began with decisions like Wickard v. Filburn, wherein the United States Supreme Court said that the federal government had the ability to regulate the economic activity of a farmer who's growing crops on his own private land for his own private use, for his own private consumption. Why? Because his consumption, his use, and his farming could impact the greater farming industry, the farming trade, and interstate commerce. And interstate commerce was regulated through the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. This is a massive moment in American history. This gave the federal government essentially unfettered power to regulate human activity, individual activity, to limit the ability of states based upon Lochner, and then in turn take up the mantle of regulating citizens of individuals under Wickard v. Filburn. From that moment, you have the constitutional justification for almost all economic regulation and most criminal regulation. You know that the United States Criminal Code at this point is unquantifiable? They've literally put United States congressional committees together to try to count the number of laws under the United States Criminal Code. We can't. We don't know. It's a mystery. Of course, as anything would remain with an investigation from the United States Congress. It gave the federal government the power to enact the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which, by the way, while laudatory and something to be praised in what it accomplished for America, also was a big change in the role of the federal government in telling citizens and businesses and states how they could behave. But the answer to when we lost our republic was also addressed recently by Tucker Carlson interviewing former Congressman Ron Paul. They were discussing the deep state. Now, the deep state is a fascinating concept, one that just a few weeks ago, perhaps, even the utterance of deep state would have earned sneers and dismissals as a conspiracy theorist. But just a few days ago, the New York Times wrote an article saying the deep state exists and it's kind of awesome. They went around the country in a video essay interviewing federal government employees, public servants, who, in their estimation, make up the deep state. And they're there to praise the existence of the deep state. Discussing the deep state with Ron Paul, Tucker Carlson asked a similar question to Ron Paul. When did we lose the republic? And he pointed back largely to the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr., the 1960s, a seminal moment in the history of America. There are those that have theorized since that moment the United States government has been run by caretakers sitting as presidents, that they all have been servants of the deep state, the intelligence community. They have been run by the military-industrial complex. They've been run by the system that, in my estimation, seems to be on autopilot in Washington, D.C. As long as the system is on autopilot, you can afford to have clowns as politicians, clowns as leaders. And I think he had a great display of that this week when Tony Bobulinski testified before the United States Congress on the potential corruption of Joe Biden. And he was met with this exchange from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Did you witness the president commit a crime? Is it your testimony today?
Yes.
And what crime have you witnessed?
How much time do I have to go through it?
It is simple. You name the crime. Did you watch him steal something?
Corruption statutes, RICO and conspiracy.
What is it? What is the crime, sir?
You
specifically.
You asked me to answer the question. I answered the question.
No.
RICO, you're obviously not familiar with. Corruption statutes.
Excuse me, sir. RICO is not a crime.
RICO is not a crime. We'll tell that to the mafia. And by the way, tell that to Donald Trump, where he should have immediate case dismissal in Georgia, where he's facing charges for RICO violations. What you just saw was not a cross-examination. What you just saw was not an intellectual display. What you just saw was a clown act, a performance, and perhaps a successful performance for AOC for a base that is too stupid to realize that that, in fact, is stupid. But that's what you get with a government that is on autopilot. You get a clown show. You get politics as entertainment. You get politics as character assassination. Take a look at this tweet. This is from, I believe, an MSNBC producer who said, now that Barron Trump has turned 18, he's fair game. This is treating leadership as a reality television show. Always wanted to attack Barron Trump, but now that he's 18, we can at least get away with it. To mind that he's still the child of a president, a child who's never put himself in the public eye, who's not offered up any political opinions or any activism. He's not Chelsea Clinton. He doesn't have an agenda or a platform. He's not Hunter Biden. He's not interested in profiting off his father's name. He's simply a character in the drama. And Mike Singleton's ready to turn that character, that individual, into a villain in his melodrama, his reality television show. Also, he's personally, not Barron Trump, but anyone who would buy into that idea, personally despicable. But this is what you get with a government that is on autopilot. I don't know when we lost the republic, but I do know that what we have today is not the way that this was envisioned by the founders of America, that a government is responsive to the people, that it's there in service of the people. That I know we've arrived at a moment where the New York Times celebrates the kind of awesomeness, kind of cool, deep state. You know, Matt Taibbi, who's done incredible work on the government and its desire to censor American citizens, said that the intelligence community has moved from counterterrorism to counterpopulism. What their efforts now are not to stop the next big terrorist attack from an Islamic radical, but to protect from a populist uprising in America, among Americans. And then you have to ask yourself, protect what? Not protect the American people. See, what's changed is a government that's not responsive to the people, that doesn't serve the people, that's not there to protect the people, but a government that is there to protect the government. There are many on the left that think what is special about America is the government. This is why you see so much about our democracy. It's not the people. It's not our culture. It's not our ingenuity. It's not our risk tolerance. It's not our morality. It's our government. In order to protect America, then we have to protect our government. And the intelligence communities need to protect it from populism. And the people need to be separated from the elites, from the deep state. I don't know when we lost the republic, but I believe that it is on autopilot. I don't believe there is a Wizard of Oz. I believe that we're looking at something dispassionate. I think that we're looking at something not unlike artificial intelligence, diversified authoritarianism, systematic authoritarianism, people that simply do their jobs like the man before them did his job and the man before him did his job. And budgets being what they are, you always have to grow your job. It's self-preservation. It's self-interest. It is protection of the government because in their minds, government is America.